3. A short dictionary of misunderstood words. Woman. Being a woman is a fate Sabina did not choose. What we have not chosen, we cannot consider either our merit or our failure. Sabina believed that she had to assume the correct attitude to her unchosen fate. To rebel against being born a woman seemed as foolish to her as to take pride in it. During their first times together, Franz announced to her in an oddly emphatic way, "Sabina, you are a woman." She could not understand why he accentuated the obvious was the solemnity of a Columbus who has just sighted land. Not until later did she understand the word woman on his which he had placed such uncommon emphasis did not in his eyes signify one of the two human sexes. It represented a value. Not every woman was worthy of being called a woman, but if Sabina was, in Franz's eyes, a woman, then what was his wife Marie Claude? More than 20 years earlier, several months after Franz met Marie Claude, she had threatened to take her life and he abandoned her. Franz was bewitched by the threat. He was not particularly fond of Marie Claude, but he was very much taken with her love. He felt himself unworthy of so great a love, and felt he owed her a low bow. He bowed so low that he married her. Even though Marie Claude never recaptured the emotional intensity that accompanied her suicide threat, in his heart he kept its memory alive with the thought that he must never hurt her, and always respect the woman in her. It is an interesting formulation, not respect Marie Claude, but to respect the woman in Marie Claude. But if Marie Claude is herself a woman, then who is that other woman hiding in her? The one he must always respect, the platonic ideal of a woman, perhaps? No, his mother. It never would have occurred to him to say that he respected the woman in his mother. He worshipped his mother and not some woman inside her. His mother and the platonic ideal of womanhood were one and the same. When he was 12, he suddenly found herself alone, abandoned by Franz's father. The boy suspected something serious had happened, but his mother muted the drama with mild, insipid words, so as not to upset him. The day his father left, Franz and his mother went into town together, and as they left home, Franz noticed that his shoes did not match. He was on a quandary. He wanted to point out her mistake, but I was afraid that he would hurt her, so during the 2 hours they spent walking through the city together, he kept his eye fixed on her fate. It was then that he had his first inkling of what it means to suffer. Fidelity and betrayal. He loved her from the time he was a child until he had accompanied her to the cemetery. He loved her in his memories as well. That was what made him feel fidelity deserved pride of place among the virtues. Fidelity gave a unity to the lives that would otherwise splinter into thousands of split-second impressions. Franz often spoke of his mother, of Sabina, perhaps even with a certain unconscious ulterior motive. He assumed that Sabina would be charmed by his ability to be faithful, that it would win her over. What he did not know was that Sabina was charmed more by betrayal than by fidelity. The word fidelity reminded her of her father, a small-town Puritan who spent his Sundays painting away at the canvases of woodland sunsets and roses and vases. Thanks to him, she started drawing as a child. When she was 14, she fell in love with a boy her age. Her father was so frightened that he would not let her out of the house by herself for a year. One day he showed her some Picasso reproductions and made fun of them. If she couldn't love her 14-year-old schoolboy, she could at least love Cubism. After completing school, she went off to Prague with a euphoric feeling. Now at least she could betray her home. Betrayal. From tender youth, we are told by father and teacher that betrayal is the most heinous offense imaginable. But what is betrayal? Betrayal means breaking ranks. Betrayal means breaking ranks and going off into the unknown. Sabina knew nothing more magnificent than going off into the unknown. Though a student at the Academy of Fine Arts, she was not allowed to paint like Picasso. It was the period when so-called socialist realism was prescribed in the school-manufactured portraits of communist statesmen. Her longing to betray her father remained unsatisfied. Communism was nearly another father, a father equally strict and limited, a father who forbade her love. The times were puritanical, and Picasso too. And if she married a second-rate actor, it was only because he had a reputation for being eccentric and was unacceptable to both fathers. Then her mother died. The day following her return to Prague from the funeral, she received a telegram saying that her father had taken its life out of grief. Suddenly she felt pangs of conscience. Was it really so terrible that her father had painted vases filled with roses and hated Picasso? Was it really so reprehensible that he was afraid of his 14-year-old daughter's becoming home pregnant? Was it really so laughable that he would not go on living without his wife? And again she felt a longing to betray her own betrayal. She announced to her husband, whom she now considered a difficult drunk rather than an eccentric, that she was leaving him. But if we betray B, for whom we betrayed A, it does not necessarily follow that we have placated A. The life of a divorcee painter did not in the least resemble the life of the parents she had betrayed. The first betrayal is irreparable. It calls forth a chain reaction of further betrayals, each of which takes us farther and farther away from the point of our original betrayal. Music. For Franz, music was the art that comes closest to Dionysian beauty in the sense of intoxication. No one can really get drunk on a novel or a painting, but who can help getting drunk on Beethoven's Ninth, Bartók's Sonata for 2 pianos and percussion, or the Beatles' White Album? Franz made no distinction between classical music and pop. He found the distinction old-fashioned and hypocritical. He loved rock as much as Mozart. He considered music a liberating force. It liberated him from loneliness, introversion, the dust of the dietary. It opened the door of his body and allowed his soul to step out into the world to make friends. He loved to dance and regretted that Sabina did not share his passion. They were sitting together at a restaurant, and loud music with a heavy beat poured out of a nearby speaker as they ate. "It's a vicious circle," Sabina said. "People are going deaf because music is played louder and louder, but because they're going deaf, it has to be played louder still." "Don't you like music?" Franz asked. "No," said Sabina, and then added, though in a different era, and she was thinking of the days of Johann Sebastian Bach, when music was like a rose blooming on a boundless, snow-covered plain of silence. Noise masked as music had pursued her. Since early childhood, during her years at the Academy of Fine Arts, students had been required to spend whole summer vacations at a youth camp. They lived in common quarters and worked together on steelworks construction site. Music roared out of the loudspeakers on the site from 5 in the morning to 9 at night. She felt like crying, but the music was cheerful, and there was nowhere to hide, and not the latrine under the bedclothes. Everything was in range of the speakers. The music was like a pack of hounds that had been sicked on her. At the time she thought that only in the communist world would music barbarism reign supreme. Abroad she discovered the transformation of music into noise was a planetary process by which the mankind was entering the historical phase of total ugliness. The total ugliness to come had made itself felt first as omnipresent acoustical ugliness. Cars, motorcycles, electric guitars, stilled loudspeakers, sirens. The omnipresence of visual ugliness would soon follow. After dinner they went upstairs to their room and Franz fell asleep and his thoughts began to lose coherence. He recalled the noisy music at dinner and said to himself, "Noise has it drowns out words." Suddenly he realized that all his life he was doing nothing but talk, write, lecture, concoct sentences, search for formulations, and amend them. So in the end no words were precise, their meanings were obliterated, their content lost, and they turned to trash, chaff, dust, sand, prowling through his brain, tearing at his head. They were in his insomnia, his illness, and that he yearned for the moment. Vaguely, with all his might, he was unbound music, absolute sound, unpleasant, happy, all-encompassing, overpowering, window-rattling din to engulf once and for all. The pain of futility, the vanity of words. Music was the negation of the sentences, music the anti-word. He yearned for one long embrace with Sabina, yearned never to say another sentence, another word, let his fuse with the thunder of music, and lulled by that blissful imaginary uproar, he fell asleep. Light and darkness. Living for Sabina meant seeing. Seeing is limited by two borders. Strong light which blinds and total darkness. Perhaps that was what motivated Sabina's distaste for all extremism. Extremes means borders beyond which life ends, and a passion for extremism in art and politics is a veiled longing for death. In Franz the word light did not evoke the picture of landscape basking in the soft glow of day. It evoked the source of light itself, the sun, a light bulb, a spotlight. Franz's associations were familiar metaphors. The sun of righteousness, the lambent flame of the intellect, and so on. Darkness attracted him as much as light. He knew that these days were turning out the light before was considered laughable, and so he always left a small lamp burning over the bed. At that moment However, he closed his eyes. The pleasure suffusing his body called for darkness. The darkness was pure, perfect, thoughtless, visionless. That darkness was without end, without borders. That darkness was the infinite we each carry within us. Yes, if you're looking for infinity, you just close your eyes. And at a moment he felt pleasure suffusing his body. Franz himself disintegrated and dissolved into the infinity of his darkness, himself becoming infinite. But the larger a man grows in his own inner darkness, the more his outer form diminishes. A man with closed eyes is a wreck of a man. Then Sabina found the sight of Franz distasteful, and to avoid looking at him she too closed her eyes. But for her darkness did not mean infinity. For her it meant a disagreement with what she saw. The negation of what was seen, the refusal to see. For Sabina once allowed herself to be taken along to a gathering of fellow immigrants. As usual, they were hashing over whether they should or should not have taken arms against the Russians and the safety of the immigration. They all naturally came out in favor of fighting. Sabina said, "They won't. Then why don't you go back and fight?" That was not the thing to say. A man with artificially waved gray hair, pointing a long index finger at her. "That's no way to talk. You're all responsible for what happened. You too. How do you oppose the communist regime? All you did was paint pictures." Assessing the populace, checking upon it, is a principal and never-ending social activity in communist countries. If a painter is to have an exhibition, or an ordinary citizen is to receive a visa to a country with a sea coast, a soccer player to join a national team, then a vast array of recommendations and reports must be garnered from the concierge, colleagues, the police, the local party organization, the pertinent trade union, and added up, weighed, summarized by special officials. These reports have nothing to do with artistic talent, kicking ability, or maladies that respond well to the salty air. They deal with the one thing only, the citizen's political profile. In other words, what the citizen says, what he thinks, how he behaves, how he acquits himself at the meetings of May Day parades, because everything day-to-day existence, promotion of work, vacations, depends on the outcome of the assessment process. Everyone, whether he wants to play soccer for the national team, have an exhibition, spend his holidays at seaside, must behave in such a way as to deserve a fashionable, favorable assessment. That was what ran through Sabina's mind as she listened to the gray-haired man speak. He didn't care whether his fellow countrymen were good kickers or painters. None of the Czechs of the immigrant gathering ever showed any interest in what Sabina painted. He cared whether they had opposed the communists actively or just passively, really and truly just for the appearance's sake, from the very beginning, or just since immigration. Because she was a painter, she had an eye for detail, and a memory of the physical characteristics of the people in Prague who had a passion for assessing others. All of them had index fingers slightly longer than their middle fingers, and pointed them to whoever they happened to be talking to. In fact, President Novotny, who had ruled the country for the 14 years preceding 1968, sported the very same barber-induced gray waves, and had the longest index finger of all the inhabitants of Central Europe, with a distinguished immigrant heard from the lips of the painter with pictures that never seemed that resembled Communist President Novotny, had turned scarlet, then white, then scarlet again, then white once more, and he tried to say something, did not succeed, and fell silent. Everyone else kept silent until Sabina stood up and left. It made her unhappy. Down in the street she asked herself why she would bother to maintain contact with Czechs. What bound her to them? The landscape, and each of them were asked to say the name of this native country evoked in him. The images came to mind would be so different as to rule out all possibility of unity. And the culture? What was that? Music, Barak, and Czech? Yes, but what if a Czech had no feeling for music? Then the essence of being a Czech vanished into the air. Or great men? Jan Hus? None of the people in that room had ever heard a line of works by him. The only thing they were all able to understand was the flames, the glory of the flames when he was burned at the stake, the glory of the ashes, and so for them the essence of being Czech came down to the ashes and nothing more. The only things that held them together were their defeats and the reproaches they addressed for one another. She was walking fast. She was more disturbed by her thoughts than by her break with the immigrants. She knew she was being unfair. There were other Czechs, after all, people quite different from the man with the long index finger. The embarrassed silence that followed her little speech did not by any means indicate they were all against her. No, they were probably bewildered by the sudden hatred, the lack of understanding they were all subjected to immigration. Then why wasn't she sorry for them? Why didn't she see them for their woeful and abandoned creatures they were? We know why. After she betrayed her father, life opened up before her, a long road of betrayals, each one attracting her as vice and victory. She would not keep ranks. She refused to keep ranks, always with the same people, with the same speeches. That was why she was so stirred by her own injustice. But it was not an unpleasant feeling, quite the contrary. Sabina had the impression that she had just scored a victory, and someone invisible was applauding for it. Then suddenly the intoxication gave way to anguish. The road had cut in somewhere. Sooner or later she would have to put it into the betrayals. Sooner or later she would have to stop herself. It was evening, and she was hurrying through the railway station. The train to Amsterdam was in. She found her coach. Guided by the friendly guard, she opened the door to the compartment and found Franz sitting on the coach hat. He rose to greet her. She threw her arms around him and smothered him with kisses. She had an overwhelming desire to tell him, like the most banal of women, "Don't let me go, hold me tight, make her your plaything, your slave, be strong." But they were words she could not say. The only thing she said when he released from his embrace was, "You don't know how happy I am to be with you." That was the most her reserved nature would allow her to express.